Sorry about the delay. Always takes a bit of time to restart the computer. Okay, so just to remind everyone what we were talking about last time. So we finished with this interesting, although maybe a bit more challenging problem of standards with uncertain marginal abatement costs. But so the key idea there is that it may look like under perfect information, so there is absolutely no difference between whatever policy we may implement, standards, quotas, taxes, because if we pick them perfectly, then if we know the marginal abatement cost and the marginal damage everywhere for every firm, then there's no question that we can just decide whatever we like and everything is going to be all right. So what is the problem is, of course, that reality is messy. And this is one part of it. So if you have a certain degree of uncertainty, then the shape of the marginal damage matters a lot. And what we just said is that constant marginal damage would lead itself perfectly to a tax, whereas something like an exponential marginal damage would be quite risky or imprecise to use a tax in that context. So just at the end, so I was asked, please describe a situation where you may have a constant marginal damage. I wasn't too sure, but yeah, I thought about it, and a big situation that may arise quite naturally is anything that has to do with negative impact on production. So if you have a say some firm that that uses some water, for instance, and then so every time you have some say, mercury in the water, then for that firm it means, oh, I have to clean it up. So and you may think that here emissions is how many times say a month or a week do you discharge your mercury in the river. Well, that's exactly how many times the firms downstream must clean it up. So it really is a constant marginal damage. And in that case, all you would have to ask is, okay, what's the cost for that firm downstream to clean up its emission when there's a discharge? Okay, so then every time that happens, we're going to tax you exactly that amount. So now you decide how much you want to discharge. Maybe you discharge once every 6 months because you really have to, and your marginal abatement cost would be extremely high. Or maybe you never discharge because then there's something there's some other way to do it. But anyways, the tax is a perfect instrument in that case. Okay, so just finishing here, I've talked about so in the title about subsidies. Oh yeah, so one important thing is in what case do we have uncertain damage? Well, we would have uncertain damage. So here it's uncertain marginal abatement cost, but other instances it would be uncertain damage. So if you have uncertain damage, then yeah. So again, maybe the tax isn't all that great because you really don't know what level of tax you need. And this is something that we've seen before. So what is the marginal damage caused by a ton of CO2 in the atmosphere? Some people say it's $100, 125, maybe more. But yeah, a bunch of studies have had a difficult time to estimate that because it's just so complicated. And then, so what's the tax? If you say, well, I know that the damage per ton is 25, then you slap a tax of 25 and you're good. But yeah, who knows what the damage is? And of course, maybe it's 25 if the amount already emitted is a certain number, but then if the amount is already twice, then the marginal unit of CO2 emitted, the marginal ton would be so much worse. So imagine that, say, the Arctic is about to melt and you just had 1 ton to the mix and then it melts and then releases all tons of methane. So what's the marginal of damage of that one last unit? Then it's enormous. Whereas if you have a good way to go, then maybe the marginal damage isn't all that big. So yeah, so policy-wise, this is a challenge. So in my impression, economists and deciders and scientists have more or less agreed that, yeah, close to zero is a very optimistic number, and probably the real marginal damage is, given the trajectory, it's probably closer to, say, 50 or even 100. Again, these are all numbers, 2005. So the paper is in 2005, and it's a review of all the numbers that were estimated up to that point. But yeah, from 2005 to now, I'm pretty sure many other studies have been done, and they are. I couldn't find a nice review of all the recent numbers, but yeah, my impression is that the economists are starting to think that it's higher than that. So it's closer to $51 than $1, that's for sure. Okay. Sorry, I'm about to speak. Sorry. Okay. So is there another way to go about accomplishing the same goal, but without having firms to pay for it? It seems silly because, as we've been saying, so taxes have the very good advantage of providing this double dividend. The double dividend. So one, you get the money, and two, you reduce emissions. So why on earth would we like to subsidize firms rather than tax them? Well, of course, we don't subsidize emissions. We subsidize reduction in emissions. So maybe I should have written emission reduction subsidies. So again, what we want is firms to reduce their emission. So why would we want this? Well, then you enter in all of the political gains, and you realize that firms have a big political weight behind them, so they are able to pressure local officials into enacting the legislation that they like. They have many lobbyists working for them. So then if your alternative is we do nothing, or we give money to firms so that they reduce their emissions, then, well, what's the best you can do? Maybe it's best to pay firms, but at least they do reduce their pollution rather than do nothing whatsoever. I go back also to chapter 11 of NAFTA, which I've discussed previously at the end of the chapter on cost CRM. So under the chapter 11 of NAFTA, if a firm can just claim, oh, I was expecting to make that much profit by polluting in your country. Now you want me to be green and to not emit emission. Well, I'm losing money. So okay, if they just contaminate your river, what do? Do you not do anything? Or so at the end of the day, a solution might be saying, okay, well, I agree that we signed this treaty and it was maybe not the greatest of ideas, but now that we're in it, let's find a solution. Would you mind agreeing to receive money in exchange for emitting a bit less? So, and yes, in that case, maybe if the damage caused by the emissions is so high, that could be a solution as well. So how does that work? Well, so they act as a reward for reducing emissions. Yeah, so they act as opportunity costs. So the question for the firm now is, should I emit this last emission? Well, if I emit it, then I don't have to pay for the abatement, but I lose the money that I would gain from not emitting it because I lose the subsidy I would receive. So that's the opportunity cost of emitting this last unit. So rather than emitting and paying the tax for emitting it, it's I emit, but I don't gain the money I would gain otherwise by abating it. Yes, so the regulator pays a subsidy for each unit reduced by the polluter, starting from a base level. And this I just added this last part to the sentence. It looks innocuous. It's not at all. So what is the base level? That's all the question there is. So if we tax emissions, then we know that the base level is zero. There's no question about it. But now what is the base level from which we decide how much a firm should receive? Well, depends what the firm would do in absence of legislation. And so if you were a firm and negotiating with the government, would you try to convince the government about yourself? Yes. Yeah, you want more profit. So how do you do that? Yes. Yes. Yeah, you exaggerate. So you say, oh, but my base level is 100,000 tons per year, and now I'm just emitting 10,000. So could you please pay me for my 900,000 I'm not emitting, for instance? So yes, exactly. So the goal is to tell the government how hard you have to work for achieving this. So you say, oh yeah, but if I did, if I didn't receive this, I would be destroying your country so much that you really would like to pay me a lot of money. So that's sort of taking the environment hostage in some ways. So it's like claiming that you would really destroy stuff so that you get money out of it. So that it's really not something that's pleasing to our ears, because you can perfectly imagine all sorts of strategic behavior. So imagine that the government says, "Oh, I'm going to decide the base level considering the emission this year." So as a polluter, what should you do? So you're saying we're starting the subsidies next year, and we're going to take the base level of this year. Yes. Yes, pollute as much as possible. So you have to be very careful about how you design this policy. Yeah, otherwise, so of course, what you would have to say is, okay, let's take some base level from, say, last year or 2 years ago, but still, there might be some shenanigan if you think that the government might, in the future, think about the subsidies, then, okay, you just pollute as much as possible. So it's not that even that you pollute until the point where the marginal abatement cost is zero, is you pollute even beyond this. So you lose money by burning too much stuff just to make sure that you make more money in the future. So that's really not yeah, the hope is that not too many polluters think in this way, but who knows? Yeah, so that's the key. So the difficulty is establishing a original base level based on past reduction. All right, so let's go back. So it's going to be a nice review of how these things work. So we're going to go back to, yeah, here we did a bunch of stuff. So let me let it there, and let's use that one. Just going to hide this. And then, so what we are going to have is, yeah, so this is 1020. So yeah, we're going to have a same original damage. Yeah, so this slide, I mean, it's just the basics of how taxes work, so not all that bad if we use it. Okay, so what's the base level here? So in theory, what's the base level? If there's no cheating or oh, sorry for yeah, net tax. So now it's we're looking at subsidies. So where do we start from? So we know that taxes are, for instance, paid from if we emit until E, then the base level is 0. So if we give money to the firm for reducing, is it? Well, 15, right? But, yeah, so we imagine that the firm would emit until 15. So that would be the firm's emissions if in absence of police. Okay, so base level is 0. 15. Okay. It's not super. I know how to show this line. Okay, all right. So what should be the subsidy? So or efficient subsidy. Per ton weighted. 10? 10 is, so you're saying this 10 there? So that's the quantity of emission that we want to arrive at. So yeah, it's part of the story. But the subsidy is how much money I pay per ton abated. Yes, perfect. So it's 20 again. So we want it to be exactly the same price. If it's a tax, the firm is going to, at 10, ask itself, should I increase by 1 ton or not? Well, if I increase by 1, my tax that I have to pay is 20, but my marginal abatement cost would be like lower than 20. So it makes more sense to not pay that tax. Here, the question is, should I at 10 abate more? Well, if I abate one more unit, then it costs me like 22 to abate, but I just make $20 for this ton abated. So it costs more to abate than not abate. So the efficiency is always the same. So MPC. So, then we're going to see all the subsidy. So here we will have a subsidy, right? Rather than T. Right. Oh. Yes. Okay. Good. So that's this. And now, so how much money is paid to the firm? So how much subsidy? Yes, 200 is always the right answer. All right. No, it's not 200. Sorry. Yeah, it's different now. So S, capital S is going to be equal to what? Yes, exactly. So it's 5 minus 15 minus 10, 5 times 20. So it's S times E. So 2, 100. So that's what the firm receives. What is the total abatement cost for the firm? How do you find it? So that would be this, right? So this is the total damage averted. Yeah, it's the area under the marginal damage curve. So the total abatement cost is how much I had to pay in total to abate my emissions. It's the same as before. Since I abate 10, so should I look at this curve or that curve? The second one, right? Marginal abatement cost. I abate at until 10. So how much did I had to abate from my base level? So I started at 15. So I had to abate 5 units. I was paid 5 times 20. But now my cost to abate is all of these units. So it's exactly 5 times 20 divided by 2. So that's 50. So now what is the total compliance cost for the firm? So this is what's new here. Think about it very well. So the compliance cost for the firm is from its base level, how much did the firm have to pay in total to conform to the policy? So in that case, that was accepting to reduce emissions in exchange for subsidies. So that's the more original part. So think a bit about it. Yeah. Yeah. 150. So how do you find this? So that is the normal. Yeah, that's I don't remember the acronym. That's the social. Yeah, total social cost. Exactly. You're better than I am. Yeah, so that's the total social cost. Why? It's because under this situation, this is the damage that the society has to incur, and this is the abatement cost that the firm has to pay. So that's from a societal point of view. That's the so. But here it's the total compliance cost. So where is it? So that's what the firm has. All right, so how much? So you're talking about this? Yeah. Yeah, no, that's it. So yeah, that so the firm, so that's the beauty of market-based mechanisms like that. From the first point of view, nothing to know about all for suffering. It's just how much cash do I get or have to pay, and how much does it cost me to reduce my emissions. That's the whole thing that the firm cares about. So I can, well, so if somebody has another idea, they can go, or otherwise I can, yeah. Bingo. So how much does it cost for the firm to comply to the policy? Well, it costs me my total abatement cost of 50, but so is the subsidy something that I have to pay or that I get? It's something I get. So it's 50 minus 100. So here the TC is TC minus yes, minus 100 minus 50. So the firm is super ecstatic about this policy because they get more money than they have to put in. So that's for firm, that's just total benefits to have this subsidy. Obviously, because yeah, who doesn't like receiving subsidies? So I can just show here. Yeah, so I shouldn't say that because that's minus this region. All right, so that's linked to this region there. So you receive this total amount of money, but you have obviously to pay this triangle there. But so you can visually see that it's always going to be negative for sure, because the firm just, the firm has the, so what's the worst that the firm could have as compliance costs in this case? What's the worst thing that the firm could do? Yeah, that's how much money could the firm lose at most? Yes, but that's the worst. The government is saying if you wouldn't mind, my good sir, reducing your emission, I'm ready to pay you money. But that's just an ask. I can buy as much reduction as I like, so I can pretty much say, oh well, if you don't pay me enough, I just don't abate whatsoever. But so if we draw the marginal abatement cost this way, then we see that yeah, the first unit are so cheap that anyway, for any size of subsidy, I'm always going to still want to abate a bit to receive money. But yeah, that's, the firms are perfectly willingly entering into this place. Yeah, and so as we were saying, so the total social cost is the same as any time that we have a efficient policy. So we emit 10, we pay this as total damage, this as total abatement cost. Yeah, and the benefit for the society from the society's point of view is, well, from the society's point of view, the subsidy again is a transfer. So in principle, if that's non-distortionary, then we don't care about it. Just somebody paying somebody else. Firms are happier, taxpayers are less happy. So then from the society's point of view, starting from E0, what's the net damage reduced? So the total, same as saying that this would be the deadweight loss of not caring about emissions. Yeah, but in real life, can you think of some other costs associated with this subsidy? So I'm saying if it's just transfer from somebody to somebody else, in principle, it's a wash, but in practice, yeah, yeah, no, it's a good. You're on the right track. Yes, and what about that? Yeah. Yes, exactly. So yes, so they have to take it somewhere. But so the key is, I said if it's non-distortionary, then so if it doesn't affect people's behavior, okay. But as we have said, so subsidies and taxes always affect behavior. So if you need to hike taxes on people's income or consumption, then you discourage people working, you discourage people consuming. So yes, you reduce an inefficiency in the economy which was caused by pollution, but you increase an other inefficiency by affecting some other market. So it's a market for some good that you have to tax, for instance. So then you reduce an inefficiency on the one hand and raise an inefficiency on the other. So what's the best thing to do? It's not so clear. Yeah, so that's all the complicated aspect of subsidies. Okay, so that's more or less that for just okay. So here we were. So just to summarize what we said, so polluters receive a subsidy S for every unit of emissions reduced from a base level E0. The total compliance cost is the total abatement cost minus the total subsidy. And here, by the way, it's so is smaller or equal to. So here the firms are very happy because they receive money. Yeah, so the polluter minimizes its total compliance cost by reducing emissions until the subsidy rate equals the marginal abatement cost. S equals MAC. And of course, if efficient, then S equals MAC. So this is what the firm does. Subsidy equals marginal abatement cost. The firm doesn't care about damages, but for the government, then the government has to pick the right amount of subsidy so that the marginal abatement cost equals the marginal damage. Yeah. Okay, so that's this. So socially efficient subsidy. So the subsidies should be set so that marginal abatement cost equals marginal damage. Yeah, but the problem is subsidies are transfer payments from the public sector, so the money must come from reduced public expenditure or extra taxes on the UNI, which are very likely distortionary. So you can, up to a point, have taxes that are, if they're small, they're not so bad, but if they become high enough, then they start to affect the economy quite a bit. Yeah, so the polluter itself may have been recipient of these benefits, of these social expenditures. So on the one hand, as a polluter, you receive money, but on the other hand, maybe the government says, okay, well, I'm going to not give so many subsidies to that industry. So that would be a neat way of doing it. So imagine that the government is anyways paying, I don't know, ArcelorMittal or some big firm of, yeah, that's is that in, yeah, that's in Quebec, right? So the work in, or Alcan, or anyway, so, so all these firms usually receive money from the government. So a way to do it would be, okay, now from now on, I'm not going to give you money free of any other strings attached. I'm going to ask you, please reduce your emission if you want to keep receiving money. So that could be a way of doing it. That would be less distortionary. Yeah, so the net social benefit is, as we were saying, the total damage forgone. So the area under the marginal damage curve, net of the social cost of compliance. Yes, and by the way, the social cost of compliance does not include so may include distortion, but not the subsidy itself, which is a transfer. Yeah, but usually if I ask you to compute this, then I'm not going to tell you, by the way, the size of the distortion is XYZ, because who knows what the distortion is, it's some other matter. So yeah. So that's the situation. So the total abatement cost is always the same. So it's 50. The total subsidy received is 50 minus 10 times 20 times 20. So that's 100. And the total compliance cost for the firm is the total abatement cost minus what the firm receives. So here it's minus 50. So the firm is very happy. It receives $50. Yeah, so subsidies have mixed consequences, to say the least. So yeah, so the firms have incentive to reduce the emissions until the unit price. So that's how subsidies work. But yeah, okay, so this is how they work. So the equilibrium reach is the same for the polluter as with an equivalent emission tax. So in principle, it's the same. However, subsidy and tax may have different impacts on the polluter's financial situation. So a firm makes higher profit after the imposition of a subsidy than without it. And of course, and would instead from a tax. So if you ask firms, then you're going to see, no, we have thought about it quite a lot, and in our opinion, a subsidy would be preferable to a tax. If you ask the firms. So this can make, yeah, so that, yeah, that's another very interesting point. So if you then pay firms in some market to reduce their pollution, so you essentially make them more profits. And so what does that mean? Well, it means that now they can charge lower prices for their goods, but also so they make profits. So it's going to motivate other firms from joining the industry. So who knows, maybe at the end of the day, per firm, you have lower reduction, but you have, if you have double the number of firms, so you have more, you may have as much emission as you started with. So that's yeah, that's all sorts of crazy consequences. Yes. Yes, but they would. So we come back to there. Uh, okay, no, well, yes, kind of, but so how I would interpret it is the following. So what's the marginal abatement cost? It's anything that the firm has to give up in order to emit less. So it may be either installing some extra systems to capture emission or just reducing production. So that could be included into this. Oh yeah, but then what you're saying is, yeah, no, that's the same as for taxes. Yes. And I'm 90% sure, but not 100% sure. I haven't thought of it that way. Yeah, my initial guess is whatever is the marginal abatement cost. So production reduction, meaning lower profits is part of it. But essentially what you're saying is, oh, if it's a tax compared to if it's a subsidy, then it, uh, so no, well, okay, for this class, no. But so you know, I'm not I wouldn't bet my life on it. So maybe you get different marginal abatement curves where whether you, depending on which policy it is, if it's a tax, if it's a mandate, if it's a subsidy. But yeah, in this class, no, it's just yeah, it's just marginal abatement cost that encompasses everything. And then whether it's a tax, whether it's a mandate, whether it's a subsidy, it's just the firm always does the same. Marginal abatement cost equal tax or marginal abatement cost equal subsidy. Yes. But it's very interesting thing. I haven't, essentially you would have to just model the situation a bit more. So look at the firm's profits and ask yourself, um, yeah, no. So if you write the firm's profit real quick, so this is how it would be. Okay, so aside, this is not at the exam, but firm's profit is price times quantity minus, and then cost. That's a function of quantity. And this then how do you model it? So if it's tax, for instance, then it's minus Q times the tax rate. So the tax rate is just an extra engineer marginal cost that you pay on top of this, and then you can just look at what you get. Yeah, so no, but now I'm just not doing the tax. I'm not even including the cost. Yeah, so it's minus marginal, yeah, total abatement cost of something like, okay, I haven't thought of it, but yeah, that's, you would have to think about what the firm is. But yeah, I think it's still distance. It doesn't matter which sort of policy you get. So if on the one hand it's a tax, it's this way, and if it's yeah, with tax, and with subsidy, then firm profit is so. Oh yeah, so that's plus. Sorry, that's part of the cost, and then minus 0. So that would be 0. So yeah, but here it's everything is in terms of quantity, so that's okay. I shouldn't go there. Sorry, I shouldn't have. Should think more about it. So you maybe you express everything in terms of emission. That's better. So, but yeah, it's more advanced. Okay. Yeah. So as a result, subsidies may, yeah, so this is what I was saying. So it may raise the total emissions from an industry, even though they reduce the emissions per firm. So that's a bummer. If your goal is to reduce emissions and you end up increasing emissions, that's not the way to go. And then the challenge of determining the base level of emissions. So yeah, the monitoring is the same. So you have to know how much was emitted, say this month or this year, to know how much subsidy the firm should receive. Like for taxes, how much taxes should be paid. But the extra challenge there is to determine what's the base level. Yeah, so each polluter wants the base level set as high as possible in order to receive the maximum potential payment for reduction. Oh, there is, however, an additional problem with subsidies not faced by taxes. That's a mystery what I was about to write there. I don't know. So that's it's the first year I'm writing these slides, so yeah, I don't know what I was about to write. Oh yeah, so I think it's double dividend, but then I put it on the double dividend. So rather than making money with taxes, the government needs to raise revenues to pay subsidies to polluters. So yeah, so it comes from government debt, higher income, sales tax. So it pushes the cost of reducing emissions onto taxpayers. So yeah, you want so in a sense, if you're asking as taxpayers to for a clean environment, then you're the one who have to pay for it. So it's you're buying it essentially. Um, uh, or an emission tax would then make the polluter pay instead. So from an ethical standpoint, we are rewarding polluters from effort rather than making them pay. So subsidies are popular in the industry, but of course, controversial for the public at large. Yeah. Um, okay, the short answer is I think we do more tax, but I'm not entirely clear about it. So, but there is an instance in which, yes, we think about, so yeah, the big question is base levels. And there are instances in which we have to think about base levels. And the really important case is, again, climate negotiations. Why? Well, because it turns out that some countries have already started making lots of effort years and years ago, while some are just very late to the party. So then do you say, oh, well, okay, now let's just look at how much emission we emitted last year and use that as base level. Well, if you're, I don't know, Quebec was invested so much in hydroelectricity, then should you say, well, I just made a lot of effort, but then the other countries may say, yeah, but for you it's easy because you have rivers, which is a good point. But so yes, how much should we expect that each country to reduce its emission? So what's the dimension of the effort already done or to be done in the future? That's a great question and a great fun for negotiators in climate conferences. So Canada is, well, any country is very good at trying as much as they can to claim that they make already an effort. So for instance, one other thing that Canada says is, oh, I shouldn't have to reduce all that much because I have all this nice forest. So, okay, you should, so what, you should just be allowed to pollute because you didn't cut your forest? I mean, so countries always try to have to pay as little as possible. So, but yeah. Okay, exercises. So again, this is, we're going to see this probably next week or the week after that. So this is just standard tax. That's not too difficult. There is one neat question that was suggested by a very smart student from last class. Actually, the same one who wrote um, the, the benefit cost analysis on cars. Yeah. Yes, so that's exactly what I'm going to. So he suggested the following. So he says, well, if it's so complicated on the one hand to convince firms to pay a tax, or on the other, raising money to pay for a subsidy, so could you just do both? So could you could they cancel out? And yeah, right away I wasn't too sure, but yeah, it turns out that I think it's not difficult at all to think about that. So you have to do it for the exercise. So yeah, so that's, could a government implement both a tax and a subsidy combined to make the policy revenue neutral for the government and the industry? So then you just say, okay, there's a tax per emission, per units emitted, plus a subsidy per units abated. And we want to make sure that in the end, the industry paid absolutely zero. They didn't receive money, but they didn't pay anything. And it's not too difficult. So thank you. Well, I don't want to spoil too much, but think about it. So, so if I'm at E there, I'm asking, and there's a tax, I'm asking myself, should I increase the emission? Well, I'm going to pay 20, but my marginal abatement cost is lower than that, so I rather abate. Here, but then the question is, okay, should I reduce emissions even more, then okay, I receive 20 if I reduce, but then my abatement cost even is more. So at this thing, you have to, you can have either, oh, increasing is going to make me pay some tax, right? Or reducing is going to give me some subsidy. So, but then you have a policy where you have both to think about. So at this point, you have both. Okay, if I increase, I pay more tax and receive less subsidy. So, so you can design it so that it's efficient. I don't want to spoil the exercise for you. That's an interesting question to ask. But I'm not aware of the government doing that. So having both subsidies and taxes. But why not then? Well, really the problem with subsidies is the base level. So my personal belief is we have subsidies when we're just powerless against the interests of the industry. And we think, well, it's better than nothing, better to have subsidies than, yeah. So even for electric cars, I mean, it's good to have subsidies to increase the research and development in electric cars and all of that. But if you knew exactly what was the marginal damage caused by some liter of gas use or some ton of CO2, then you just slap this, and the car industry would just adapt itself to that, and you wouldn't have to subsidize anybody. We do it because at some point yeah, we're not too sure, and we have a big number of different instruments, and we try everything. But if we could, if everything was known, we would just need one, and we would be good. All right, so that's about it for tax and subsidies. Questions, comments? Well, anyways, you had lots of questions, so always interesting. Yeah, not too many people come to class, but it's the most interesting people, so that's awesome. All right, so let's go with the last chapter, chapter 11. Yeah, tradable emission permits. Okay, transferable emission permits. Oops. All right, so what are they? Well, it's the opposite of tax rates. Well, not the opposite, but tax rates operate on prices, or taxes or subsidies. So what you do is you increase or decrease the price of doing something, and then people adjust the quantity as at will. But then there's the other instrument, which is setting the quantity and letting the price adjust at will. And as we've seen in some instances, taxes don't do that well under uncertainty. So, and in that case, maybe quotas and emission permits could be fine. So this. Oh, well, I haven't done all the, yeah, I wanted to have anyways. Okay, so with taxes, the transferable emission permits are becoming more and more used, government intervention to fight pollution. So what they are they? They are essentially rights that you can buy. So there are rights that are distributed by the government, just like claims on I don't know, mining fields or rights that if you want to do something, you have to pay the government to have the permit to do it. Well, now we just say that emitting is part of the thing that you have to pay to get the right to do. But once you pay it, then you can emit a certain amount with it. And a key aspect is that they are transferable. So meaning if I don't want to emit anymore this year, and somebody is willing to pay me some money to buy my permit, then I can just sell that permit to the other person. If you couldn't do that, then they would just be individual quotas. So that would be, well, I don't know, whoever has this piece of land or this piece of river, that's the amount that you can emit right there. But it means that the only real person who is going to ever be affected by this is the owner of the river. But now really it's anybody whatsoever that's under the legislation can decide to buy a permit or sell a permit. So that's a key thing to make markets work. Yeah, so they can be bought and sold, and the price is agreed upon by the participants on the market. And of course, at the end of the day, we hope that the market is competitive and that the equilibrium price is a price that brings efficiency in the situation. So each permit is also called an allowance. So entitles its holder to emit 1 unit, so say kilogram per ton of waste material emitted specified in the right. So you can have permits for different things. So permits for carbon emission, for anything like. And of course, yes, if you want to emit a certain amount, then you need as much permit as to buy as many permit as needed to emit at that point in time. All right. So that's something that that's ongoing. So once you have it, then you can emit for a certain amount of time. And then once you don't want to emit as much, then you just sell it back. So the key is to verify that once you emit, then you had the right to emit. So what's the neat thing about this is that it gives you an upper bound, an upper limit on the total quantity of emissions. So the government essentially says, I don't care who emits what, but I know what the marginal damage and the total damage is. So based on this, I'm going to decide that I don't want more than 1 million tons, maybe that's a big numbers, 1,000 tons emitted. And so then deal amongst yourself to decide who gets the right to emit it. But at least I know how many permits I have signed on. So I can be sure that if I check properly, at least, that this is what is going to happen. So you don't have to tell every person in the jury that's how much you emit, that's how much you emit. You just give these permits, whatever form you want, and let everybody trade them. So yeah, it's a centralized decision made on the total number of discharge permits to put in circulation. So it sets an upper limit on the emissions that cannot be exceeded. So so it's not the standard on any specific firm compared to standards as we've seen, where it's just really says everybody must do exactly this way. Here, people can do as they like. But still, they ensure that the target level emission of pollution is achieved. Yeah, and we're going to see that, like a tax, it is treated in a Yeah, so if transferable emission permits are traded in a competitive market, then it is a cost-effective policy. We are going to find that the marginal abatement costs are all the same for all the firms. Yeah, because the market, if the market is competitive, then you get a single price in the market. So you get a price that is say 50 or 10 or 20, and then all firms just decide based on the market price, oh, should I emit or should and buy a permit, or should I sell my permit and not emit? So then all the firms are going to be paying the same, and thus all the firms are going to have the same marginal abatement cost. So things are cost effective in that sense. All right. Yeah, so what's the optimal amount? So it's always the same. So you set it such that marginal abatement cost equals marginal damage. As always, the challenge is obtaining good knowledge on the marginal abatement cost and the marginal damage curve. And if you have deficient knowledge, then as we're going to see, sometimes, yeah, the permit might be better than so the transferable emission permit might be better than a tax, or sometimes a tax may be better than a permit. So if you had perfect knowledge, that would be good. Yeah, so but what's neat is essentially you need the marginal abatement cost, but of the industry, not of industry. So in a sense, what you have to know is more or less how much, how costly is it for firms to reduce their emissions on average. But you don't have to know each and every specific firm what is their marginal abatement cost. So that's the neat thing about it. So you don't have to know it for each polluters. To achieve cost effectiveness, each polluters know what they have to do. They do for themselves what's best. Yeah, so once the target level of pollution is set, then the market reveals the polluters' marginal abatement costs curves. Because if you say, okay, I'm allowing, say, 100, 1,000 permits, then you see how much firms trade these permits. So if you just look at it and, oh, it turns out that firms are not willing to pay more than 5 cents, well, probably they have a very low marginal abatement cost, or you have emitted way more permits than necessary. But if permits are skyrocket in price, then what does that reveal? Well, it reveals to you that yes, it's super costly to reduce emissions, and firms are ready to pay a lot of money to be able to. So once that's the neat thing. It gives you a lot of information of how the market works. Yeah, so polluters with low marginal abatement cost will, so if say for instance you give a certain number of permits to everybody, then polluters for which it's not costly to abate emissions are going to decide to sell their permits because for them it's not too expensive to reduce emissions. And for older firms, maybe then for them it's might be very expensive to reduce emissions. So they are going to want to buy these permits from the more modern firms. How do you distribute permits? That's an interesting question. So they can be freely distributed. They can be because who gets the money is the government. So the government says, okay, now I'm going to sell this amount of permits. Who wants them? Who wants the first one? And then there's a first firm is going to bid on it. Yeah. Yeah, sure. And then everybody else must. Yeah, sure. Yeah. That's a devious thing to think about. Yeah, so the question is, though, how much the firm is going to pay for that. But so that would be even worse, I would say, in this regime, right? So what's the problem with freely distributed? Just gonna finish on this, but so imagine that the permits are freely distributed. What do you think is going to happen in real life? Who's going to get them? Friends of the president. So the president is going to say, well, I'm going to distribute permits, but I really like you guys, so take some of them and be good, and then all the others, well, they didn't receive any, but you can buy from my friends. So yes, that's so you can imagine that if you what's your goal as a government? So your goal is, if your goal is to do something good for the environment or for your country, then you're going to want to distribute permits in a nice way. But if what you want is to just create favorite political friends, then just pick your favorite firm, give all the permits to them, and they don't need to sell it. So then you just created a state monopoly. um, yeah, so that's the whole part of it, is we hope that the market does work, and that all the so nobody can affect can manipulate the market price, and everybody is a willing part of the trade. Yeah. Okay. So we're going to start with yeah, experience of trade permits in the past. So I see you next week. Have a nice weekend.